at Carter and Wells since college. But when I turned 18, my father told me he had placed a small portion of company shares in my name. A gesture, he said, to remind you that you matter even when the world tells you otherwise. It was never discussed again. But now, are you sure it was me? I typed positive full name, date of birth, even your old address in Paluma. But the signature doesn't match what I remember from your HR files. Looks off. I sat up straighter. Can you send it? He paused. Technically no, but I'll try. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Everything that had once felt like emotional neglect now took on a different shape, a colder one, a legal one. What if it wasn't just forgetting to call me for the funeral? What if it wasn't just erasing my name from a eulogy? What if they were erasing me from something bigger? I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out the old wooden box my father gave me when I graduated high school. Inside were notes, birthday cards, a silver pen, and one letter I hadn't read in years. In it, he'd written, "One day you'll understand why I kept your shares separate. Family is complicated, but business should be clean." I remember laughing at the time, not understanding what he meant. Now I did. It wasn't about sentiment. It was protection. And if what Nate said was true, someone had tampered with it. Celia, or worse, my mother. I opened my laptop and started searching court filings, county records, anything related to power of attorney transfers or shareholder revisions. I was out of practice, but I still remembered how to dig. I found a listing dated 18 months earlier. Form 2848, IRS, Power of Attorney and Declaration of Representative filed under my name. Authorized parties: Margaret Carter and Celia Carter. The pit in my stomach turned to something molten. I never signed that. The signature was smooth, clean, but too clean. No hesitation, no tailing flick at the N in my last name. Something I'd always done since I was a teenager. It was manufactured. I took a screenshot. Nate messaged again. I can't say more over text, but Evelyn, something's not right. You should talk to someone who knows your father's legal records. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I thought of Harold, the man who had given me my diploma. The man who had said, "If you ever need anything, call me." I found his card in the drawer. My fingers trembled as I dialed. I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I knew this much. It was no longer just about being forgotten. It was about being erased intentionally. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Harold agreed to meet me the next morning at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore, his kind of place. It smelled like old paper and black coffee. The booths were worn but clean, the kind of place where time slowed down. He was already there when I arrived, a leather folder resting beside his espresso. "Evelyn," he said, rising to shake my hand. "You looked just like your father when he was cornered and ready to fight." "I'm not sure if that's comforting," I replied with a half smile. He gestured to the seat across from him. "You said it was urgent." I nodded and sat, placing a printed copy of The Suspicious Power of Attorney on the table. Did my father ever file anything that gave my mother or Celia control over my stake in Carter and Wells? Harold's face tightened. He picked up the paper and scanned it silently. Then, he opened the folder beside him carefully, pulling out a thick stack of documents. "I've been waiting for this day," he said softly. "What do you mean?" He laid out a familiar letter on the table. I recognized my father's handwriting instantly. "This, Harold said, tapping the page, "is the original will, the one your father signed before his health started to decline. Filed, notarized, witnessed, legally airtight." I leaned in, heart pounding. Harold turned to a marked section near the end. Clause 14. "Upon the event of my passing, I leave 49% of Carter and Wells to my eldest daughter, Evelyn Carter." I read the words slowly, carefully, as if they might disappear if I blinked too hard. "And the rest," I whispered to Celia and Margaret equally, but with Evelyn holding decision power in any board deadlock. Tears stung the back of my eyes. He hadn't forgotten me. He had Made me the cornerstone. I looked up at Harold. Then why does the current registry list the shares under their names? He exhaled through his nose. Because 6 months after his death, a revised version of the will was submitted to probate court and signed. It claimed he had changed his mind. But that's not legal. Exactly. And when I filed a challenge, it was dismissed. No one called you. No one verified your copy or your testimony. It was rushed. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. 3 letters, all returned. No forwarding address. Your mother claimed you were overseas and unreachable. She lied. I figured as much, but the firm representing your mother was aggressive. They painted you as estranged, unstable. Said you'd refused contact. I sat back, breath gone. So, what do I do now? Harold folded his hands. That depends. If you're willing to fight, I can file a formal petition to reopen the probate case, but we'll need more than suspicion. We need proof. A forgery? He nodded. Of fraud, coercion, and chain of custody issues on your father's original documents. I stared down at the original will, my name etched in legal ink, bold and unshakable. They tried to bury this. They tried to bury me, but I wasn't staying underground anymore. I want to fight, I said quietly. All the way. Harold smiled, slow and proud. Then let's remind them who they tried to erase. Harold's office wasn't like the glossy corporate suits I had seen in my mother's and sister's world. It smelled like oak and ink. His desk was cluttered with files, legal pads filled with sharp handwriting and framed black and white photos of people who clearly mattered. I liked that it felt human. He slid a folder across to me, his expression grave. This is where it gets serious. Inside were 2 forms. One was the power of attorney filed in my name, a document that granted full financial and legal rights to Margaret and Celia Carter over my assets tied to Carter and Wells. The second was a handwriting analysis report. I sent both your old HR forms and this signature to a forensic analyst, Harold said. Independent, not cheap. And he pointed to the bottom of the report where the conclusion was bolded. High probability of signature forgery, differences noted in pressure, pattern, stroke order, and letter-shaped continuity. I exhaled slowly, both dread and relief washing over me. So it's fake. Yes, this proves they forged your signature, which is a federal crime, Evelyn. My hands clenched on the folder. They forged my name to steal my inheritance. To erase you legally, he corrected. This wasn't just about money. It was to make it impossible for you to challenge anything. They tried to make me invisible. He gave a slow nod. But they made a mistake and you found the crack. I closed the folder. What now? Harold leaned back. There's an upcoming event. Celia is unveiling a new green energy investment initiative through Carter and Wells. A big press affair. Investors, board members, even media will be there. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to crash a party? I want you to reclaim your place. I considered that a public confrontation wasn't my style. But maybe this time. That was the point. If they tried to erase me in silence, then maybe the answer was to show up loudly. I'm in. Harold's lips curled into a smile. Then let's do this right. I'll notify the legal board before the event. They won't have time to hide anything. You'll walk in holding the real will, the forgery report, and your rightful name. A strange sense of electricity ran through me, equal parts fear and fire. For so long, I'd accepted being forgotten, even convinced myself I was above caring. But, in truth, I'd been hurting quietly, eating the scraps of love and pretending they were enough. Not anymore. Harold stood, extending his hand. You sure you're ready? I shook it firmly. They're not the only ones with something to show the world. That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror holding the same letter my father had written me when I turned 18. The one where he said, "You matter. Evelyn. Even when the world forgets, I won't." I whispered it aloud like a vow. The next morning, the invitation hit the company's social feeds. Carter and Wells. proudly unveils its future green initiative led by our visionary executive, Celia Carter. Location: the Grand Atrium. Time 6 p.m. Dress code formal. I bought a new suit. Not for them, for me. I had no illusions that walking into that room would be easy. I expected the whispers, the stares, but I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't walking in hoping for love or approval. I was walking in with power and truth, and I was ready to use both. The Grand Atrium shimmered beneath cascading lights, its marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Every table was draped in emerald green, the color of the Carter and Wells Future Green Initiative. Waiters in white gloves moved like clockwork, delivering champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. This was Celia's kingdom now. She stood near the stage, radiant in a custom emerald gown, shaking hands with investors and smiling for photographers. Our mother hovered nearby, her expression tight with pride and control. I arrived just before the ceremony began, unnoticed at first. I wore a tailored black suit, hair pinned up, eyes focused. In my hand was a slim leather folder, Harold's copy of the original will and the forgery report. At precisely 6:30, the house lights dimmed. The MC took the stage, voice echoing through the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight, we celebrate a bold future. Carter and Wells is proud to unveil its future green initiative led by our exceptional executive, Celia Carter. Applause erupted. Celia took the stage with poise, delivering a perfectly rehearsed speech about innovation, legacy, and progress. She didn't mention Dad. She didn't need to. In her version of the story, the past had already been rewritten, but not for long. Just as the MC returned to close the segment, his smile faltered briefly. He glanced at a small card handed to him moments before. We also have a special announcement. This evening, he said. Before we continue, we are honored to welcome back a founding shareholder whose legacy within Carter and Wells is not only deeply rooted, but lawfully protected. Celia's smile froze. Margaret stiffened. I stepped forward. The MC's voice rang out. Please welcome Evelyn Carter, primary beneficiary of Richard Carter's estate and senior shareholder of Carter and Wells. Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned toward me as I ascended the stage, each step steady, deliberate. I felt the burn of disbelief in the crowd, but also a few scattered claps, awkward, uncertain. I reached the microphone, but didn't speak, not yet. Instead, Harold emerged from the wings, papers in hand. He stepped beside me, nodding once before turning to the projection screen. I am Harold Gaines, he began, legal counsel and longtime friend of the late Richard Carter. Tonight I come not only as a guest, but as a witness. He held up a page. This is the original will of Richard Carter, signed and witnessed in my presence. Here is his handwriting. Here is his signature. The projector beamed the document onto the screen behind us. In bold, unmistakable ink was the line, I leave 49% of Carter and Wells to my daughter. At my sister's wedding, the music had just started when my mother leaned toward the MC and whispered something. He cleared his throat awkwardly, then announced, please welcome the family. Minus Evelyn Carter. There was a silence, then a few forced chuckles. I stood near the back, gift still in hand. Heels aching, heart clenched. That was the moment it hit me. Not like a slap, but like slow suffocation. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They had erased me. And maybe the worst part, a small part of me still hoped they'd call me back. They didn't. I was 9 the first time I realized no one was coming. For me, the snow had started falling sometime after lunch. Light at first, then heavy enough to blur the outlines of the trees behind the playground. School let out early. One by one, kids were scooped up by waiting parents, the squeak of boots and zip of coats echoing through the corridor. By 3:15, the lobby was empty, except for me. I sat on the bench beside the trophy case, hands tucked into my armpits, backpack between my knees. I counted each pair of Headlights that passed by the school, hoping one would turn into the lot. They didn't. By 4 o'clock, even the janitor gave me a concerned glance. "Still waiting, Evelyn?" he asked. I nodded. "My mom's probably just running late." He checked the clock on the wall. "You sure you don't want to call her?" "I'll wait." Because I'd been taught not to bother people, not to make noise, and deep down I really believed she'd come. Outside, the snow thickened, the wind carving sharp lines across the sidewalk. I moved to the front steps, peering out through the glass, and stood there waiting, hoping, staring at the parking lot as the daylight drained from the sky. By 5 o'clock, I couldn't feel my fingers, and still no one came. It was dark by the time the janitor came back with his coat on. "You can't stay here, kiddo. I'm locking up." I nodded slowly and stepped. Until now. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life again. The screen turned black, then slowly lit up to reveal my father. He sat in a worn leather chair in his home study, wearing the gray sweater I remembered from childhood winters. His face was thinner, tired, but his eyes were sharp, focused. He began softly. "If you're seeing this, then it means there was a dispute." He looked directly into the camera. "Let me be clear. Evelyn is my daughter, my firstborn. And she is the only person in this family who never asked for more than I could give. She never took, she never manipulated. She just showed up. Even when we made it hard." I felt my chest tighten. I gave her part of this company because she earned it. Not because of blood, but because of integrity. She is the one who stood by me when the others were too busy planning weddings and parties. She is the one who visited when no one else did. A pause. He looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his tone was steel. "The rest of the family, Margaret, Celia, they were always more interested in what they could get. I'm not bitter. I just want the truth on record." He leaned forward. "If there's ever a time when they try to erase her, this tape is for the world. Evelyn Carter is the rightful heir to my name, my trust, and my belief." The screen faded to black. No music, no credits, just silence. Then chaos. The room erupted, not in applause, but in gasps and hurried whispers. Cameras turned, reporters already typing into phones. Board members stood to confer, eyes wide. A few guests had even begun filming the screen, replaying what they just heard. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't need to. I felt her silence, saw her stillness from the corner of my eye. Celia's mouth moved, but no words came out. The MC stepped back on stage, visibly shaken. "I believe that concludes our presentation tonight." The applause that followed was slow at first, then steady, then thunderous, but not for the project, not for Celia, for me. And in that moment, as every face turned my way, not with pity, not with condescension, but with acknowledgement, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. I turned, stepped down from the stage, and walked straight down the aisle of the atrium. No final speech, no lingering gaze, just one hand over the folder at my side and my head held high. Behind me, the claps continued. But I didn't look back because this time I didn't need to. It didn't take long. 2 days after the event, they came. I saw them. Through the front window, my mother still wrapped in her favorite camel coat, and Celia dressed like she was headed to court rather than a living room. They stood on my porch like people rehearsing an apology they didn't believe in. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I watched them shift nervously, glance at each other, then back toward the doorbell they'd already pressed twice. When I finally did open it, I said nothing, just held the door. Celia spoke first. "Evelyn, we need to talk." Her voice was softer than I'd heard in years. My mother stayed behind. Her unusually quiet. I stepped aside, motioning toward the living room with a calmness I didn't feel. They sat on the edge of the couch like strangers in a waiting room. I remained standing. "We were wrong," Celia started, "about a lot of things," my mother added. "You were always more like your father than we understood. He never explained things clearly." I almost laughed. So, it's his fault now. No, Celia said quickly. We're not blaming him. We just thought we were protecting the company, the family name. By forging documents, I asked, voice sharper now. Celia flinched. My mother looked down at her hands. I made mistakes. I see that now. There was a long silence between us, the kind that used to make me feel desperate to fix things, to mend the tension and fill the space. Not anymore. I finally spoke. You didn't just forget me. You rewrote the story without me in it. You edited me out of every photo, every memory, every right I had. And you didn't flinch while doing it. We thought you'd walk away, my mother said. That you wouldn't fight. That's the part that stings you. No, I said quietly. You thought I wouldn't care enough to come back. Celia reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo, one I hadn't seen in years. Me at 10 years old, sitting beside Dad at a company barbecue, our arms around each other. It was worn at the edges. He kept this in his drawer, she said, holding it out even after he got sick. I took it, not because I needed the proof, but because I knew she needed me to take it. Then I looked at both of them. Family doesn't require blood. I said family is the place you choose to come back to, the people you choose not to harm. And when harm happens, it's the people who choose to make it right. They looked at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as someone they'd lost and only now realized was never theirs to discard. So, what happens now? Celia asked. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. You find your own way forward. I already have mine. Neither of them protested. They stood, walked to the door, and stepped onto the porch in silence. As they reached the steps, I spoke again, one last time. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not coming back. Not to the version of family you offered. They turned and I closed the door gently behind them. 3 weeks after the public reckoning, I stood in my father's old study, now part of the Carter and Wells archival wing. The room had been untouched, dust on the spines of ledgers, a faint smell of cedar lingering in the panels. I ran my fingers over the brass plaque on the bookshelf. Richard Carter, founder, 1973. 2022, the chair he used to sit in, his thinking chair as he once called it, still faced the window, and I knew deep in my chest that I couldn't keep any of this. I had won legally. My ownership had been restored. The company's board had issued a formal statement acknowledging the forgery and apologizing for the oversight. Journalists had written long, dramatic think pieces about betrayal, inheritance, and corporate ethics, but none of it healed the real wounds. I hadn't fought to reclaim power. I fought because I'd been erased and needed to remind the world and myself that I had always been there. But now that I had everything back, I didn't want it. I met Harold at the firm's downtown office later that day. He offered me coffee. I didn't drink, and a knowing look that didn't need words. I'm not here to discuss legal options, I said quietly. I'm here to hand them back. He raised an eyebrow. You mean the shares? All of them? His jaw tightened. Evelyn, are you sure? I was erased from something that wasn't mine to begin with, I said. It was my father's dream, not mine. The only part of this I want to carry forward is what he taught me. That no one deserves to feel disposable. He sat back, slowly nodding. What do you want to do instead? I opened my folder and slid across a single-page proposal. On top in bold were the words, the Carter Foundation for Second Chances. A scholarship program, I said, fully funded from the shares I now control. Focused on kids who've aged out of foster care, kids abandoned by family. Kids like I used to feel, the ones told they didn't belong. Harold read the line I'd underlined twice in the proposal. We don't give them a handout. We give them a hand to stand up. He looked up, his eyes a little glassy. He'd be proud of this. I smiled. That's the only inheritance I want. The press release went out a week later. Celia and my mother didn't attend the unveiling, though I heard they'd agreed quietly, begrudgingly, not to challenge the move. They had lost more than a company. They had lost control of the narrative. And I didn't need to say another word to prove anything. The event was held at the public library, not the company's. Atrium. Simple wooden chairs, an old podium, a few dozen people who cared. More about purpose than power. At the end of the event, I took the mic. Not as a shareholder, not as someone's daughter or sister, but as Evelyn Carter, rebuilt, renamed in her own voice. I once got erased from a family list, I told the crowd. Photos, documents, events. I was written out as if I never existed. And I fought hard to be seen again. I paused, scanning the room. But in the end, I realized the greatest power isn't fighting to stay on someone else's list. It's choosing to write your name where it matters most. I held up the plaque that would be installed at the foundation's first scholarship office in honor of Richard Carter, who believed every forgotten child deserved a second chance. A long silence followed, then applause, not thunderous like the atrium's, but steady. True. After the crowd dispersed, I sat alone for a while under the evening light, filtering through the tall windows. I wasn't the daughter left out anymore. I was the woman who walked away by choice. Not from weakness, from clarity, from strength. And as I looked out into the city that once felt like it had no place for me, I whispered the final line my father wrote to me in that letter all those years ago. You were never lost, Evelyn. You were just waiting to be found by the right version of. Outside, the snow was knee-deep in some spots. I trudged the 4 blocks home, coat zipped to my chin, tears freezing before they could even fall. When I reached the front porch, the house was lit up. Laughter floated from the windows. Inside, pink streamers crisscrossed the ceiling and balloons with "Happy Birthday, Celia" danced above the dining table. My mother was lighting candles on a cake shaped like a unicorn. Celia, 3 years younger, was wearing a sparkly tiara and a new dress. No one looked up when I opened the door. No one asked where I'd been. I slipped out of my wet boots and stood in the hallway, watching as my mother carried the cake to the table. The room erupted in off-key singing, camera flashes, capturing each moment. Celia clapped her hands, beaming, and me. I stood there, dripping snow onto the hardwood floor, invisible. That night, after everyone had left, I wandered into the living room. A new framed picture sat on the mantel. My mother, Celia, and a few cousins all smiling around the birthday cake. Everyone present, everyone perfect, everyone but me. I searched the photo twice just to be sure I wasn't in it. Later, I found out my mother had told the photographer, just take one before she gets back from school. She's probably with a friend or something. She never thought to call. She never noticed I wasn't there. That photo stayed on the mantel for years through Thanksgivings, Christmases, graduations. It traveled with us when we moved to a different house after Dad died. And each time I passed it, I stared at the empty space where I should have been, and no one else seemed to care that it was missing someone. Eventually, neither did I, or at least that's what I told myself. It was Christmas Eve when the question finally slipped out of me. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and Bing Crosby crowed from the radio. Celia danced around the living room in her red plaid pajamas, her curls bouncing, while I sat cross-legged by the fireplace, trying not to hope for too much. That year, I had tried hard. I'd helped fold laundry without being asked, memorized all my spelling words, even wrapped some of Celia's presents when Mom was busy. I thought maybe this time someone might notice. Maybe I'd get something special, too. When Mom handed out the gifts, she did it with flair. "This one's for my little angel," she said, placing a large ribbon-wrapped box in Celia's lap. My sister squealed and tore it open. A brand new pink bicycle with a basket in front and glittery streamers on the handlebars. Celia shrieked, "Mom, it's perfect." Mom laughed and pulled her into a hug. Only the best for my birthday girl. Celia's birthday was in December. That always meant Christmas and her party blurred into one long parade of gifts and celebration. She never had to wait. I waited, holding my breath until Mom finally turned to me. "Oh, almost forgot." She reached behind the couch and tossed me a small squishy package wrapped in crinkled newspaper. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a pair of worn wool socks fraying at the heel. I recognized them. They used to be Dad's. There. Warm, Mom said. You're always cold, aren't you? I nodded. Thank you. She moved on, helping Celia tighten the bolts on her new bike. I sat there for a long time, clutching the socks, not angry, not even sad, just hollow. Like something inside me had gone missing, and I couldn't remember when. Later that night, while everyone else slept, I stood in the hallway outside my mother's bedroom. The door was cracked, open just enough for me to see the soft glow of her bedside lamp. I knocked once and stepped inside. She looked up from her book. What is it? I hesitated. Can I ask you something? She sighed. Make it quick. I swallowed. Am I adopted? The words came out in a whisper. She blinked. What? I mean, I don't look like anyone, and you never before I could finish. She was out of bed and standing in front of me. Don't you ever say that. Again, she snapped. Her palm struck my cheek before I even saw it coming. The slap was sharp, but it wasn't the sting that made me cry. It was the look in her eyes, not fury, disgust. You should be grateful you even have a roof over your head, she hissed. Don't you dare question what I've given you. I backed out of the room without another word. That night, I lay awake in bed, one cheek burning, clutching those old socks like a lifeline. I tried to tell myself she was tired, stressed, that she didn't mean it. But deep down, something had shifted. For the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a passing thought, but as an undeniable truth. I didn't belong here. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't even second. I was just tolerated. And maybe not even that. The cough started on a Monday and didn't stop. By Thursday, I was wheezing. Between breaths, my chest tightening with every inhale like someone had wrapped a rope around my lungs and kept pulling. At 24, living alone in a cold walk-up apartment above a porn shop, I didn't have much. But I had enough self-awareness to know this wasn't just the flu. I took a cab to the ER. The triage nurse took one look at me, pale, shivering, unable to speak without hacking, and whisked me into the back. Within an hour, I had N4 in one arm, oxygen in my nose, and a diagnosis, acute pneumonia, bordering on sepsis. The doctor asked, "Do you have someone we can call?" I nodded, my throat roar. My mother. I gave them the number. Part of me hesitated, but I convinced myself it was the right thing. She'd come. She had to. Pneumonia wasn't just a cold. This was real. This was serious. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Finally, a nurse entered holding a manila folder. Your mother dropped this off, she said. Your insurance information. She said she couldn't stay. She didn't come in. The nurse looked uncomfortable. She said something about needing to get back to dinner. She was dressed up, maybe? In event. I nodded slowly, even though my heart had just taken another blow. The nurse adjusted my 4 and left. I turned away from the door, curling into myself, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. I checked my phone. One text. From Celia. Mom said you were being dramatic again. Get better soon, though. I stared at it for a long time, then turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the bedside table. No flowers, no soup, no visit, just a file folder. That night, as the hospital machines beeped softly around me, I imagined what it might have felt like to have someone there. Someone who sat by the bed, held your hand, asked if you needed water or another blanket. Someone who didn't treat your illness like an inconvenience. I remembered a moment from years before. Celia had scraped her knee during a school play. My mother rushed to the stage like it was a battlefield injury. She carried her off, kissed her forehead, bought her ice cream on the way home. Me? I got a file folder. The 4 in my arm stung a little more that night. I drifted in and out of sleep, waking to coughs that rattled my ribs. A nurse came in during the early morning to adjust my oxygen levels. She looked barely 22, exhausted, but kind. Your family coming in tomorrow? She asked softly. No, I whispered. She didn't press. Just tucked the blanket around my feet a little tighter and dimmed the lights. That moment, small, quiet, was the closest I came to comfort. And it didn't come from my mother. It came from a stranger. The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Bright lights beamed down on rows of proud parents and restless graduates in navy blue robes. I adjusted my cap. Hands clammy, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from a kind of restrained hope I'd been trying to bury for weeks. Today was supposed to be different. I was valedictorian, top of my class. Years of late-night study sessions, unpaid internships, and skipped vacations had brought me here. I had earned this. And maybe, just maybe, my mother would see that. Maybe she'd be in the crowd. Maybe she'd stand and clap when they said my name. I kept glancing over the audience. The ushers had stopped letting people in 20 minutes ago, but I still scanned each row, looking for her face, for her beige coat, the familiar tight bun, the slightly annoyed expression she always wore when forced to attend things that didn't involve Celia. Nothing. As the dean welcomed the attendees, my phone buzzed in my sleeve. I glanced at the screen. Mom, can't make it. Celia's wedding tasting is today. Take pictures. Congrats. The message hit harder than I expected. Not angry, not apologetic, just transactional. My throat tightened. I blinked hard and forced myself to look forward. Don't ruin it, I told myself. Don't let her absence define this moment. When the dean called my name, the applause felt distant. I rose, walked to the stage, and accepted the folder that held my diploma. But what caught me off guard wasn't the weight of the paper. It was the man handing it to me. He wasn't faculty. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and spoken too little. He smiled warmly, extending his hand. Evelyn Carter, he said with a nod. Your father would have been proud. I froze. He noticed. I'm Harold, he said quickly, leaning in. Just enough that only I could hear. You used to play chess with your dad in college. He was a good man. I swallowed. Thank you. He gave my hand a firm shake and stepped back. The cameras flashed. My classmates cheered. I walked across the stage with my diploma clutched tight, heart heavier than it had been all year. After the ceremony, I found Harold near the exit, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. You knew my dad? I asked. Very well, he said. We worked together for years. He talked about you often. Always said you had a sharper mind than he ever did. I blinked. He never said that to me. He frowned. Shame. He should have. We talked for a few minutes. He told me about my father's early days building the company. How he would brag about my essays in college. How he kept a framed picture of me on his desk even after he moved to a smaller office. I hadn't known any of it. No one told me those stories. Before we parted, Harold placed a card in my hand. If you ever need anything, he said, call me. Your father would have wanted that. I nodded, too choked up to reply. That evening when I got home, Celia had posted 15 photos from her wedding cake tasting. She was radiant, her dress perfect, Mom standing beside her like a queen. The caption read, Best day ever. With my favorite person. I didn't comment. I didn't like the photo. I just closed the app and stared at my diploma on the table next to Harold's business card. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone had forgotten me. The call came from Mrs. Knowles, the neighbor across the street from my childhood home. Evelyn. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking before I even knew what she meant. I just saw the obituary. I assumed you already knew. Knew what? There was a pause, the kind you never forget. Your father passed 2 days ago. The funeral was yesterday. I nearly dropped the phone. I hadn't heard anything. No call, no message, no black ribbon on the door. I hadn't even known he was sick. My mind scrambled through possibilities. A mistake, a misprint. But Mrs. Knowles wouldn't lie. Not about this. I hung up without saying goodbye. Numb fingers trying to dial my mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. I texted Celia. No reply. I drove 3 hours that night, headlights slicing through the dark, barely remembering the roads I once knew by heart. When I pulled up to the house, everything looked normal. No signs of morning, no cars in the driveway, just darkness and the cold porch light flickering like always. I knocked once, then twice, no answer. Then I peeked through the front window. Inside, the living room was spotless, as if nothing had happened. On the mantel, next to the usual porcelain figurines, was a single frame, a photo of my father smiling in his favorite fishing hat, standing on a pier alone. No family, no me. I rang the bell again. This time, Celia opened the door halfway, surprised but not shocked. "You came?" she said flatly. "Of course I came. Why didn't anyone tell me?" She shrugged. "We thought you knew." I laughed bitterly. "You thought I'd hear about my father's death through gossip." She didn't answer. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. There were remnants of a gathering, half-drunk wine glasses, a floral wreath tucked against the wall, a guest book still open on the console table. I flipped through the pages, hundreds of names. Messages like, "He was the best of us and gone too soon." But not once did I see my own name. Celia followed my gaze. "We didn't know if you'd want to be included," she said. I turned to her, my voice low. "I was his daughter." She crossed her arms. "He didn't mention you in his will." "That's not true. You weren't close." "Because I wasn't allowed to be." She looked away. I made my way to the dining table where a small display had been set up. A collage board of photos from Dad's life. Fishing trips, board meetings, backyard barbecues. There were photos of him with Celia, with my mother. Even one with the dog we had for 2 years. But none with me, not even one. The absence burned worse than any slap, sharper than any insult. It wasn't just erasure. It was a rewriting. A clean slate that never had me on it. I walked out without saying another word. Outside, the air was crisp, the night unnervingly quiet. I stood there for a while, hand on the car door, trying to decide whether to scream or sob. Instead, I did neither. I simply drove away. And this time, I didn't look back. 2 days later, still reeling from the quiet brutality of my father's absence, from his funeral, from his photos, from his family, I returned to the house, not to see anyone, but because something nared at me, a detail that didn't sit right, the obituary. Mrs. Knowles had mentioned it was in the local paper, and I hadn't looked. Now I needed to. At the public library, I flipped through the archives until I found it. Page 14, bottom corner. I read the headline once, then twice. Businessman, philanthropist, and beloved. Father remembered. Father, I scanned the article quickly. It mentioned his contributions to Carter and Wells, his fishing trips with Celia, his volunteer work. Then the final paragraph. He is survived by his loving wife, Margaret Carter, and daughter Celia Carter, both of whom stood beside him until his last breath. Daughter. Singular. I blinked, reread, then felt my stomach twist. There it was. Not just a mission, deliberate eraser. I snapped a photo of the column, heart thudding. If my name had been left out here, where else had it been scrubbed? The answer came later that night when I got a message from someone I hadn't seen in years, Uncle David, my dad's younger brother. He'd missed the funeral due to travel, and when he heard I hadn't been informed, he reached out. "Weird thing," he said over the phone. I read Celia's eulogy. It was polished, but I swear, something was missing, like it didn't sound like your father at all. My fingers clenched the phone. Celia wrote. He hesitated. "Margaret said your dad had written something before he passed, but it didn't match his voice. I thought maybe he was too sick to be himself. Can you send it to me?" He did. I read it once, then again. Every line, clean, smooth. Safe. A perfect farewell from a man who, if this were to be believed, had never once mentioned he had more than one child. There was no Evelyn. I sat, frozen, the weight of absence pulling every limb down. This wasn't just negligence. This wasn't a forgotten call. Or a missed text. This was deletion, intentional, systematic. I returned to the house the next morning, storming past Celia, who opened the door with a smug half-smile, and found my mother at the kitchen table sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Where's the original eulogy?" I asked. She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Dad's original eulogy. The one he actually wrote." "I don't know what you mean," she said too quickly. "You let Celia write it." "She did what needed to be done. Your father was too weak. He said everything she wrote anyway." "No, he didn't." My voice was low, but it carried. "He wouldn't have left me out," she stood. "Don't start this again. You left me out of the obituary. You left me out of the funeral. Now you're telling me he wanted me gone? You were never around, Evelyn." She snapped. "You left this family long ago." "I left because I was pushed out." She slammed her mug onto the counter. "Your father didn't want drama at his funeral. He said he wanted peace. And your presence, well, let's just say it, wouldn't have helped." "Don't you dare put this on him," I said, teeth clenched. "He never shut me out." "You did. You always did." Her eyes flashed. "Believe what you want." I turned to leave, then paused. "One day the truth's going to surface, and when it does, I want you to remember this moment because you're going to realize how cruel it was to cut your own daughter out of her father's goodbye." She didn't respond, just turned her back to me and walked into the living room. That was the last time I stood in that kitchen as someone trying to belong. From that moment on, I stopped asking for space at their table. I started preparing to take it back. I wasn't invited to Celia's wedding. The official RSVP list didn't have my name. No email arrived. No call. But I heard about it. Of course I did. Weddings of that scale don't happen quietly. Photos trickled through social media. White roses, crystal chandeliers, a vineyard in Soma Valley where even the grapes seemed curated. Still, I went not because I expected a warm welcome, not because I thought I could fix anything. I went because I still believed somewhere deep in the most naive part of myself that maybe this time would be different. I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't touched in years and brought a modest gift, a custom engraved silver frame with a note inside for the next chapter of your life. Love, Evelyn. I spent longer on that note than I care to admit. The venue shimmered in early afternoon sun. Guests mingled with champagne, soft jazz playing under murmurs and laughter. Everyone was dressed like they belonged. I stepped onto the edge of the reception area, trying not to look lost. The MC, an upbeat man in a tailored tux, was standing by the mic, flipping through cards. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the family of the bride." Before he could continue, I saw my mother glide up behind him, her smile still plastered on as she leaned in and whispered something into his ear. His eyes widened for a second, then he cleared his throat. "Minus Evelyn Carter." There was a beat of confusion, then polite, nervous chuckles. A few heads turned. One woman gasped quietly. I stood frozen, still holding the box in both hands. A security guard in a black suit approached, slow and respectful. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." "I'm her sister," I said, though even I didn't believe the conviction in my voice anymore. "I understand," he said. "But the family has made it clear." I looked at the guard, then at the guests, none of whom met my eyes. Then I looked at the head table where Celia sat, radiant in her gown, my mother next to her beaming like she'd won. Neither of them looked my way. I turned, walked back down the stone steps, each one echoing louder than the last. The box still clutched in my hands. When I reached the parking lot, I placed the gift gently on a bench beside the valet stand. As I slid into my car, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was intact, my posture upright, but something in my eyes had cracked. There was no fury, no explosion, just finality. That was the day something inside me shifted completely. Not because of the public embarrassment, not even because of the rejection, but because I finally understood I had been chasing something that never existed. at a place in a family that had already closed its doors. The sun was dipping low by the time I made it home. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat on the couch in silence, shoes still on, dress wrinkled. My phone buzzed in my purse, but I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. 3 messages, all from the same number. Unknown. Evelyn, it's Nate from marketing back at Wexler and Pierce. You remember me? I was the MC at the wedding. Didn't know until too late. I'm sorry. There's something you should know. Weird stuff going on with Carter and Wells. Legal documents. Your names. On one, but not your signature. I stared at the screen, reading the last message. Twice. My chest tightened, not from sadness this time, but something sharper. Suspicion. Nate Whitman. We'd worked together for a year at my first real job. He was smart, funny in a dry way, and way too good at spotting patterns. We'd gone our separate ways when I left the firm, but he was always reliable, the type who didn't throw around big claims. I texted back, "What kind of documents?" He replied instantly, "Power of attorney? Looks like something filed 2 years ago. Authorizes your sister and your mother to manage your stake in the company." I only saw it because the family name caught my eye in the vendor onboarding list. I froze. My stake. I had no formal role. Evelyn Carter. A hushed silence gripped the room. Harold continued. That will was never revoked, and yet attempts were made to strip Evelyn of her legal ownership through a forged power of attorney and falsified documents. He displayed the handwriting analysis next. The side-by-side comparison was undeniable. Celia looked as if someone had knocked the wind from her. Our mother's mouth was a thin, bloodless line. I stepped to the mic. "I didn't come here tonight to ruin a celebration," I said, voice steady. "But I also didn't come to stay erased. For years, I've been pushed aside, left out of photos, out of conversations, out of my father's memory. But this document proves what I've always known. He never forgot me." I paused, eyes sweeping the room. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth, about legacy, and about standing in the place I was always meant to stand. Silence, then 1 clap, then 2, and slowly the room erupted, not in roaring applause, but something gentler, respectful, acknowledging. I saw a board member nod, another whispering to his colleague, brows raised. I had shifted the story, and this time no one could take it back. The murmurs hadn't stopped. Even after Harold's presentation, even after my brief speech, the room pulsed with whispers and half-formed questions. I stepped away from the podium, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to breathe. I had reclaimed my place, not just legally, but in the eyes of those who had watched me vanish for years. Then Harold turned to me with a quiet nod, something unreadable in his expression. "There's one more thing," he said, almost a whisper. "Your father asked me to share this. Only if it ever came to this." Before I could respond, he turned to the audience again. "I'd like to end tonight with a message directly from Richard Carter," he said. A message recorded shortly before his passing in his own voice, in his own words. It was never released publicly.